the last couple of weeks, as we've gone through Proverbs, we've seen how no, first of all, this book is much different than the rest of the Bible. I mean, obviously, it's considered one of the principles of the foundations of wisdom literature in Judaism, but in many ways, it's as many people point out, it's similar in many ways to Egyptian wisdom literature and Babylonian wisdom literature. Definitely, it comports with Jewish values and Jewish teachings, right? So there's nothing not Jewish about it, but there is a different kind of sense to it. And, we're going to see this a little bit in the next book that's also wisdom literature, which is Job, which has a much more philosophical bent to it. And, there's really not a lot in this text. Well, we're about a third of the way through it right now. You haven't really seen much that is about Jewish ritual, for example, about the temple, about kind of the organizing structures of mitzvot and commandments. There's really an understanding of wisdom, teaching, and knowledge, but not really specifically, if you will, Jewish knowledge. Definitely good behavior, but it's not your typical Jewish text in a lot of ways. And interestingly, I don't know how to describe this, but even in the Bible, Jews are kind of messy, in this sense that they're things are very relatable and things are messy in life. And while there's definitely good decisions and bad decisions that people make in Proverbs or encouraged to make and not to make, it's a lot more black and white here. And Judaism and Jewish texts and Jewish stories, interestingly, are a lot more gray. They're a lot more dynamic, and there's a lot more kind of messiness to it. And Proverbs seems to make things look a little bit simpler than I think Judaism usually makes things look. Not, again, I mean, there's black and white, the right and wrong stuff, but in our stories, a lot of times people do wrong and then fix it or try to fix it, and things are messy, and this seems a little bit more straightforward, if you will. So we'll take a look and see what you think today. So we're going to start the last week we definitely talked about, and even the week before, we talked about wisdom as a female. That's definitely how we start in chapter 9 today, with wisdom personified as a woman. This line that begins this text, Chochmat Banta Bita. It's even hard to say. Chochmat Banta Beta. Wisdom has built her house. Chochmat Banta Bita. It's a very kind of strange phrase in a way, but it's definitely in the feminine form of the verb to build, which is not often used because oftentimes there's men building things, but this one's clearly wisdom. And wisdom has built her house. I've actually heard a female cantor, songwriter, Jewish songwriter. She created a chant to this. I haven't found the chant online, but we did it at a retreat, and it was an interesting. It doesn't have to be a feminist. It was not a feminist. It was not a all women group that was there. I was there, and it was just a nice way of kind of opening up a circle with these phrases, Chochmat Banta Beta. And it's almost, you can hear, almost got like a mantra sound to it. Chochmat Banta Beta. So let's take a look at what does that mean? The wisdom has built her house. Rosemary, if you'd take us through.
Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has prepared the feast, mixed the wine, and also set the table. She has sent out her maids to announce on the heights of the town, "Let the simple enter here." To those devoid of sense, she says, "Come, eat my food and drink the wine that I have mixed. Give up simpleness and live. Walk in the way of understanding." To correct a scoffer or rebuke an evildoer regarding a blemish is to call down abuse on oneself. Do not rebuke scoffers, for they will hate you. Reprove the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will grow wiser. Teach the righteous, and they will gain in learning. The beginning of wisdom is fear of God, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through me your days will increase and years be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself. If you are a scoffer, you bear it alone. The stupid woman bustles about. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits in the doorway of her house or on a chair at the heights of the town, calling to all the wayfarers who go about their own affairs, "Let the simple enter here." And to those devoid of sense, she says, "Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten furtively is tasty." He does not know that the shades are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol.
So in this chapter, you can definitely see the difference between wisdom personified as a woman and a stupid woman, the opposite, which is, of course, is not just stupidness, it's and simpleness, but it's also death and destruction in ways that, again, are evil, that take people down a bad path. And it's such a bad path that the path is death. The translation they used here, Rephaim Sham, the shades are there. Ghosts is another word that we could use for that. It's not a word that we see a lot in Hebrew, Rephaim, but that's why they translated it as shades. The idea, again, is this is the souls of the dead. Again, seems to be not just a simple woman, but a woman that represents adultery and in this case, it seems more than just a woman physically taking people in adultery and having sex with them. This one seems a lot more spiritual and a lot more metaphorical. But this line is a famous line: "Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten furtively is tasty," which again is understood to mean people engaging in behavior they're not supposed to be doing. They enjoy it at the time, right? It feels good, it tastes good when it's happening, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous behavior. And so again, it's not really focusing on mitzvot, other than there is a commandment not to commit adultery, but this is really much more in the realm of behavior that is just general behavior. I mean, you don't have to be Jewish for these things to be true. These are just moral and ethical behavior. As I mentioned in the first week, we had this phrase before, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, right? This is a very similar phrase. It ends with this, "and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." This is the one that's usually used, as I said, as a bumper sticker. This is the one that's usually the one that's quoted, or that's on the posters. Of course, as we mentioned before, when we saw the phrase, it's an interesting one because it essentially says that knowledge and wisdom are not separate from, or not the opposite of faith. And so, for religious universities and for religious institutions and for scientists that are engaged in religion as well. You know, scientists that try to maintain a religious conviction, which is oftentimes frowned upon in the scientific community. This phrase kind of is their motto, right? And so, you know, a lot of people who kind of, you know, go back and forth on in argue, the people who argue about you know, who argue about whether faith and science are mutually exclusive. You know, people, you know, this line is kind of you know, this is kind of the motto, if you will. Look, there are a lot of people who try to maintain you know, try to maintain their faith and engage in science. And in many ways they're kind of isolated. And so in some cases they're celebrated by, you know, religious people almost as martyrs or as you know, people who are kind of battling against these other forces. I think one of the most famous, and I've seen him interviewed before. He's, you know, he's been on Colbert a few times, and he's done quite a lot of talk shows over the years. He's got a good personality. Is this guy right here, Francis Collins? He's the head of the Human Genome Project, and he was the director of the NIH until just a couple of years ago. Which is, you know, fairly political position, and you know, he worked for Democrats and Republicans, but he's considered one of the I mean, he's kind of the father of modern, you know, at least in America, human genetics. What's interesting about him, of course, is because he's religious. You know, he's kind of been involved in discussions about the ethics of genetic, genetic discussions, you know, things that are going to have a bearing on what we do with the genetic insights that we have. So this is the last book that he wrote, came out just a few months ago, The Road to Wisdom on Truth, Science, Faith, and Trust. He also wrote a book, as you can see, about 13 years ago called The Language of Science and Faith, Straight Answers to Genuine Questions. So this guy, you know, takes science very seriously, and he also takes religion seriously. So, and so he's, to some extent, he's kind of the go-to guy in this country when it comes to religion and science. There's a lot of people in Israel who are engaged in this discussion too. We just don't talk about them as much because we're not in Israel. But Israel has similar discussions, and again, Israel's a country that's committed to scientific inquiry and scientific, you know, really pushing the envelope in biology and technology and so many things. And so Israel's also had these discussions about where religion and science, where they intersect and where they challenge each other. And so, yeah, I mean, this is not atypical for modern countries that are also dealing with religion, you know, and also, of course, where the intersectionality is with politics. But again, this is kind of, if you will, the line that, you know, kind of opens up the possibilities that they're not mutually exclusive. I like this phrase a lot because I think it opens with, at least in my understanding of it, that when we say the beginning of wisdom is fear of God, I also, as I've said many times, not just here, it's not just I'm picking and choosing contextually in this line. I like the phrase, instead of fear, awe, reverence. The beginning of wisdom is the awe, the Holy One, the eternal. And I think that if we enter into wisdom with a sense of awe and reverence, then we're also picking up, I think, what the intention of this is, which is that whenever we think we know something and then realize that we just are scratching the surface of it, it helps us keep in perspective that we're still learning, that we're always learning. And we mentioned that these phrases that are used here for knowledge and wisdom, they are different. Chokhmah is usually translated as wisdom, which is again a knowledge that we derive from experience and over time. Experiential knowledge, if you will. Collected knowledge. Da'at, we usually translate it as knowledge or intellectual data, information that can be processed and that can be gathered almost independent of time. Usually it does take time to gather knowledge, but if you could download the information right into your brain, that could be da'at. That's, again, somebody who can, if you will, if wisdom is the person who's experienced life and can give information, to people based on, pragmatic reality, da'at could be translated as intellectual, literally information, and knowledge that is accessible immediately. Bina is they translated here as understanding. Bina is oftentimes translated as discernment, what we would sometimes call emotional intelligence, the ability to know whether you follow down one path or the other path, to know right and wrong, to be able to make decisions, and to, again, discernment is a good translation for it, to be able to know what we're supposed to do in a given situation. Sometimes it's also a little bit kind of like emotional intelligence. And so these three things are different. They're used throughout the book of Proverbs. We use them in Judaism a lot. They make their appearance, as I mentioned before, in Kabbalah, Kabbalistic teachings. And as I mentioned before, it is the acronym Chabad, Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. And so when Chabad was started as a Hasidic movement, as the movement took off, they stopped referring themselves by their traditional name, which was the Lubavitch movement, which was where they came from. And so as they still, call it Chabad Lubavitch, but if you look at what they really tried to do, is they tried to rebrand as with a Kabbalistic acronym of Chabad, which is interesting because these ideas are intellectual. These are things that have to do with the mind. And as I mentioned several times, Hasidism really didn't start out as an intellectual movement. On the contrary, it started out as a almost what we would call a New Age movement. In Eastern Europe, Chabad was really, really New Agey and was not looked upon with respect, because Hasidism was about how you're feeling, about praying with your heart, really not necessarily focusing on even necessarily practice, but intention and love of God and love of other people. And Hasidism was really looked down upon by intellectual Jews in the 1800s. What we call them now the Mitnagdim, they didn't call themselves that. That means the other side. They looked at Hasidic Jews as New Agey, unreligious, non-intellectual, to some extent, really reform in using today's kind of approach and attitude, they would have the Jews of Lithuania and the cultural and intellectual centers really looked down on Hasidic Jews as not being intellectual. And so Chabad, to some extent, took that challenge, if you will, and rebranded itself as a Hasidic movement that was committed to studying and to knowledge and to encouraging those three aspects of the brain, which are knowledge, discernment, and wisdom, and intelligence in those things. Wisdom, I would say, yeah, wisdom, discernment, and intelligence is their acronym. It was almost to say that's not true. We're very intellectual. So that phrase has all three in them: chokhmah, da'at, and bina. What else? There was one other line in here I just wanted to share with you. This one is one that Jewish folks have focused on before. We've talked about chocheach before. Chocheach is reproving somebody, right? Chastising somebody, telling somebody when they've done wrong. Well, right here's a really important line. People who don't take life seriously, which again, we have this word in Proverbs several times. It's this word let's, which by the way, was a word that we used in Yiddish too, for somebody who's a fool, right? An idiot. Don't reprimand, don't rebuke, don't correct a scoffer, a fool, an idiot. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to hate you. They're not going to just not pay attention. They'll hate you for doing it. But if you tell someone who's wise, a chacham, if you say to a wise person, you've done wrong, they will love you. Now, this is a great sense of how to approach, and we don't always know who's going to be stupid about something like this and who's going to be wise. But number one, it's a little bit of a reminder to us. If you know the person's not going to take criticism well, if they're not going to pay attention, if they're going to hate you for it, and you know that, don't bother. Don't bother. But if they're a smart, caring, empathetic, thoughtful person, if you correct them, they won't hate you for it. They will love you for it. They will like you and appreciate it. And that's really, really powerful advice. Because oftentimes people will say to me, I got to confront this person. I got to tell them, family member, a friend, I've got to tell them the truth. And I'll tell people sometimes, if you think it's going to work, if you think that it'll be heard, then by all means. But if not, you might be making the situation worse. And if the purpose of it is for you to get it off your chest, so be it. But be honest about it. Don't say you're really trying to help the person. If you think the person will hear it and you think you can tell it to the person in a way they can hear it, then by all means. But if not, it's just going to make things worse. So this is a really important idea, which is that it really does depend on who you're talking to. You can talk to two different people who've done the same thing, and some people will hear it and change and be thoughtful about it, and other people will never hear it, and they'll hate you for it. So it's a caution too to us, when we're on the side of being the reprimanded, to think about how we're going to take that criticism. Right? How are we going to hear it?
I agree with that, but it's problematic too, right? With times when we need to speak up, even when people don't agree with us, like in the last year.
Yeah, but again,
times I feel like I'm talking to fools.
yeah, well, it's tough too. You have sometimes when we direct a message out to lots of people, yeah, then some people are going to hear it, and some people aren't going to hear it. I mean, I deal with that a lot. If I write something or if I give a sermon that that people I don't do corrective sermons a lot. I did one once and it was not well received. And the people who really needed to hear it were not going to hear it because I gave it in a sermon. So it was not good. But
I've been to sermons actually where people walked out.
yeah,
It was not pleasant.
no, I don't do that, but I have said things before where I really was hoping that people would hear it, and it's not the right format. But
Yeah.
look, I mean, I have it when I just wrote an article for about Hanukkah, and it was essentially the same stuff that I've written before over the last year. This war happened. I mean, you brought it up, Gail, and I think it's a fair thing. You know, I as a person who's, you know, in some cases sometimes defending Israel against. Now, look, I wrote it for the Signal, so the audience wasn't as negative as they might be in some other parts of the country. But the piece I wrote last week, I had a couple letters. I don't often get letters, but I got a few letters, and you know, I responded to them, and actually I never saw, at least when I saw last week, the Signal decides what what letters they allow, what responses they get posted. I never saw, by the way, I'm just going to look real quickly right now. When I saw it a few days ago, I didn't have any negative stuff because I wrote about Hanukkah and I tied it to Israel, and I tried not to tie it so much to Israel because it was really about anti-Semitism and against what the Jews have dealt with. But I was, you know, I thought maybe we'll get somebody who says, well, you know, this is stuff that Israel created, and so, you know, no, that they haven't posted any. They didn't post any. They didn't post any comments. But I basically said that, you know, we don't want to kill people, and we don't like killing people, and the Jewish army is different than other armies. But yeah, but a couple of people sent me emails through the temple website. I quoted Golda Meir, who said, "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children. We cannot forgive them for forcing us to kill their children." So
Nice.
I used that line. So yeah, I mean, it's similar stuff, but, you know, I knew that some people would. I mean, I wasn't telling people what to do. I was just saying, hey, look, you know, this has been a tough year for the Jewish people, and um, you know, maybe it challenged some people, but I don't know.
This has been an awful year, and I'm just tired. You know, it's
Yeah,
just exhausting.
yeah. Um, so yeah, sometimes sometimes that happens if I'm putting out a message that's going to go out to a lot of people. But yeah, usually I don't rebuke people. It's especially in a large group, doesn't make sense to rebuke. It doesn't work. So you're going to definitely get people. They're definitely going to get people who hate you. But yeah, this is good advice for human interaction, I think. Which is, you know, why are you saying it to the person? Are you saying it to you feel better? You get it off your chest? I mean, sometimes you have to. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm not saying you have to hold stuff in. But remember, you're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for them. And if they don't take it well, don't be surprised. You know, you got to know your audience is the lesson from that when it comes to rebuking. It's a really good idea. And as we move into chapter 10, I pointed out that the first 9 chapters are a unit. They're a collection of collections. They were not written by one author necessarily. Nobody thinks that. But chapter 10 clearly begins another unit. So I didn't bring it in, but I have a comment. The Anchor Bible commentary on Proverbs has chapter 1 through 9 they're written by the same author. The Anchor Bible series was basically a great undertaking that people who really want to get into the Bible really on a deep level with biblical commentary. The Anchor Bible series was the best, and it was edited actually by one of my professors, David Noel Friedman, who was an endowed chair simultaneously at UCSD and University of Michigan, which is not an easy thing to do, to be so well respected and so well regarded that 2 universities are allowed to share you. but he was also, on top of that, the editor of the Anchor Bible. Now, he only wrote one of the Anchor Bible series, but basically he got to pick the best scholars for any of the books of the Bible. He knew that that person was an expert on that book. He hired them to do the commentary on that book. And it was a great honor if you got chosen by him. And they went through two iterations of some of the books, not all the books, but they did a series like in the 40s and 50s, 60s even. And then they did a later one in the 90s, 80s, 90s, and in the knots. And they were really great, and they are really great, and they definitely stood the test of time. And so the Proverbs one was written for Anchor Bible, and they did the Christian Bible as well. They even did the Apocrypha. They did the books of the Maccabees and the Apocrypha. But the Hebrew Bible is in blue, the Christian Bible is in red, and then the Apocrypha is in white. And I think I have a lot. I don't have all of them, but they're very good. And the Anchor Bible for Proverbs is chapter 1 through 9 is one volume, and then 10 through 31 are the second volume, because again, they are different. And one can make the argument they could have like 3 sections for Proverbs. They probably didn't, just for the sake of length and not wanting to have a book that was too short. But they really did break this up because they saw that there's something going on differently in these different sections. And so this one here in chapter 10, we begin another section, and it begins with the Proverbs of Solomon, right? It begins with another introduction, an editorial insertion here. This one, you're going to see the change is not just in message, and the message is actually not even that different, but the style is much different, in the sense that now we're going to get into what we'd call anaclectic writing, which is more like the sayings of Confucius, more like the text that we did from Pirkei Avot, where you have one-liners, if you will. They're really two-liners because they're biblical poetry, they're biblical style, where they kind of have 2 repeated ideas with synonyms, but in the sense that you could take one of the lines in some cases and not use the second part, which is a repetition. But a lot of times it'll be the good way and then the bad way. This is the good thing, this is the bad thing. We saw some of those in the previous chapters, but now they're really laid out like that, where the previous line is not necessarily at all connected to the next line. And so let's take a look. Chapter 10 and beyond. We'll probably read about 4 chapters of this section. So this kind of marks a little bit of a break, but still, again, never was an issue. People just said that this is the book of Proverbs as we have it. And here we go.
The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son brings joy to his father. A dull son is his mother's sorrow. Ill-gotten wealth is of no avail, but righteousness saves from death. God will not let a righteous person go hungry, but denies the wicked what they crave. Negligent hands cause poverty, but diligent hands enrich. He who lays in stores during the summer is a capable son, but he who sleeps during the harvest is an incompetent. Blessings light upon the head of a righteous person, but lawlessness covers the mouths of the wicked. The name of a righteous person is invoked in blessing, but the fame of the wicked rots. Whoever has a wise heart accepts commands, but one whose speech is foolish comes to grief. Whoever lives blamelessly lives safely, but one who walks a crooked path will be found out. Whoever winks causes sorrow. One whose speech is foolish comes to grief. The mouth of a righteous person is a fountain of life, but lawlessness covers the mouths of the wicked. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers up all faults. Wisdom is to be found on the lips of the intelligent, but a rod is ready for the back of the senseless. The wise store up knowledge. The mouth of a fool is an imminent ruin. For someone rich, wealth is a fortress. For the poor, poverty is a ruin. The labor of the righteous makes for life. The produce of the wicked makes for want. One who follows discipline shows the way to life, but one who ignores reproof leads astray. One who conceals hatred has lying lips, while one who speaks forth slander is a dullard. Where there is much talking, there is no lack of transgressing, but one who curbs the tongue shows sense. The tongue of a righteous person is choice silver, but the mind of the wicked is of little worth. The lips of a righteous person sustain many, but fools die for lack of sense. It is the blessing of God that enriches, and no toil can increase it. As mischief is sport for the dullard, so is wisdom for the man of understanding. What an evildoer plots backfires. What the righteous desire is granted. When the storm passes, a wicked person is gone, but the righteous person is an everlasting foundation. Like vinegar to the teeth, like smoke to the eyes, are sluggards to those who send them on a mission. The fear of God prolongs life, while the years of the wicked will be shortened. The righteous can look forward to joy, but the hopes of the wicked are doomed. The way of God is a stronghold for a blameless person, but a ruin for evildoers. The righteous person will never be shaken. The wicked will not inhabit the earth. The mouth of a righteous person produces wisdom, but the treacherous tongue shall be cut off. The lips of a righteous person know what is pleasing. The mouth of the wicked knows duplicity.
Mhm. So you can see some of these lines are a little connected, but a lot of them are not connected at all. I mean, the last two definitely, mouth and the mouth of the righteous person, the lips of the righteous person, are connected with the tongue and the mouth of the wicked. So there are there are some lines that go together, but for the most part, again, some of these lines definitely seem to be strung together. They seem to be a collection, which is why, again, some people have said that Proverbs is a collection of collections, that these lines don't necessarily were not necessarily written by the same people. They were assembled. Again,
How old do we think Proverbs is? I know you probably said and I missed it. How old do you think Proverbs is?
So we know that it was we know it was a book by the time of the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, because Septuagint it's in a slightly different version than the Septuagint. So we talked about the fact that it is different versus what we have. And again, some of the books that are in the Septuagint, some of the ways that Proverbs is different is significant. And there's a significant difference in the chapter ordering and the way that it exists, which means that Proverbs was still pretty much in flux by the 2nd century. So we think that it's fairly late. We think it's from the Greek period, from the Hellenistic period, not least of which is it's kind of engaged in some Hellenistic, if you will, some of the Greek philosophical sayings, especially more ethical. Greek philosophy covered lots of things, that wasn't just, metaphysics, though that was an interesting thing that the Greeks, started speculating about, what are the building blocks of the universe, those kinds of questions. But a lot of Greek philosophy was also ethical behavior, was also dealing with, what kinds of, what are the ways that we need to be living? And so there was some of that. We also mentioned that some of this, though, seems very similar to the Egyptian and Babylonian wisdom literature, which we also have, and we can see some of the similarities that exist, especially with some of the Egyptian wisdom literature, which is very old. So some of this definitely was from an older period. Traditionally, of course, in Judaism, we saw these as collections from Solomon, as it just said. This is from Solomon. Most people do not think it was written by Solomon. It doesn't have any of the earmarks of ancient biblical Hebrew. It also doesn't necessarily have some of the things that we'd see in later Hebrew. It doesn't have what we call Aramisms, which are Aramaic tone. Doesn't really have Greek words, which we have in later texts, really much later texts. We start to see Greek coming into Hebrew, especially in the Talmud. I mean, the Talmud has quite a few Greek loan words in it, but this doesn't have that. So it doesn't reflect the Greek period, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't written at a time when Judaism and again, that encounter with Greece really starts during the time of Alexander the Great, by about the 300s. That's when Israel comes under control of the Hellenistic empires and the empires that split up after Alexander the Great dies and his generals take over. Again, Israel's caught between the Seleucid dynasty and the Ptolemaic dynasty, which is what we actually are celebrating during Hanukkah. The fight against the Seleucid dynasty that was based in Syria, the Greek Syrians, who interestingly were based in some of the same places where we're watching civil war come out of right now, some of those cities. And the Ptolemaic Greeks that were based in Egypt, whose most famous ruler was, of course, Cleopatra. But this is during the time that probably, again, they're kind of caught between those two, but for the most part, being left alone. It's this time of Jewish history that we just don't know much about, from the return from the exile, the Babylonian exile, from once the Persians took over, which is about mid 5th century, to the mid 3rd century. It's kind of a dead time in Judaism because it was peaceful. We don't know a lot about what was happening other than what we have in Josephus and some of the writings that tell us that we're kind of caught in the middle, but we were not. It was a fairly peaceful time. We were pretty much left alone, and it was just, we just don't have a lot of information about it because there weren't wars and there wasn't the same kind of historical output. But it didn't last long. We're talking about a period of about 250 years. And then we get to the Maccabean period where we're starting to, again, fight for our lives and really being tossed about between the Roman Empire and the fights that are going on at that time. Interestingly, the Maccabees signed a treaty with the Romans. People don't talk about this a lot, but one of the ways the Maccabees got the Greek Syrians off their back is they signed a peace treaty, not a peace treaty, but an alliance with the Romans. And the Romans basically sent a letter to the Seleucid dynasty saying, if you bother the Jews, we'll be there. We're going to have their backs, which was ironic because, of course, eventually they owned us. But this was a case of welcoming in a new power as our defender. And it still happens in politics today. I only say that because, again, going on a little historical tangent is important for Hanukkah right now because it starts tomorrow. But yeah, it was written during the time just before probably Hanukkah took place, and Jews are dealing with confronting this overwhelming cultural influence of the Greeks, which was very.
I think you can definitely see it. Just the way it's written. It's certainly different from biblical poems. That we saw in Psalms.
Yep, in Psalms, yeah. So
Yeah,
you
it's
see,
very different.
you see a little bit of the style, a little bit of the the biblical poetry, the repetition, the this is the good way, this is the bad way, but you really don't see, as we mentioned already, the focus on God, the focus on practice. I mean, we have the occasional line, right? The way of God, the fear of God, reverence of God. You have just kind of general theology, if you will, but not, you got to offer sacrifices. I mean, we haven't seen it one time. You have to do these mitzvot, these commandments. You don't have it. You really don't have that type of specific bless you, this Jewish practice. It's general ethical behavior, not to be wicked, not to speak falsely, not to do the good things, right? But there's not a whole lot of specific, and this is the these are the Jewish traditions here. It's just general behavior, and
Kind of like Kohelet, isn't it?
yes. And Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, when we get to that, we're going to see maybe again another step towards that, which is really philosophical, really almost, hey, is this about God at all? Uh, a, a very Greek, especially Stoic, some people say a Stoic influence on Ecclesiastes. But we start to see it in Proverbs a little bit. And again, that's why we think it's from this kind of period where Jews are being confronted with this and kind of creating an output that is reflective of kind of what was expected. But again, it does even go back to some of the Egyptian and Babylonian stuff, which is older. And so that's why scholars are hesitant to just place it in the Greco-Roman period or the Greek period, the Hellenistic period, because they recognize that this is very similar to some of the Egyptian texts that we have found. So why do we have to assume that it's from a period when we know the Greeks were involved in it? And again, the language doesn't say, hey, this is from a Greek period, or again, from the Aramaic, when Aramaic started making a bigger appearance in our daily speech. So that's why people are hesitant to put it, just say it's definitely from the 300s, because it's from a period where we're almost saying we don't know exactly what was happening in that period. And so maybe it's from that period because we don't know how much Greek influence it had, there was. It maybe wasn't fully that way. It was still kind of, if you will, Persian and I won't say Middle Eastern, because that's totally anachronistic to say Middle Eastern, but Egyptian, Babylonian, and not European. I don't even want to say that because nobody thought about it as Europe yet, but the Greek style. So it is again, lots of lessons of doing the right thing. Don't engage in foolish talk. Don't talk a lot, by the way. There's a lot of this. Don't talk a lot, which is an interesting idea that the rabbis also continue on, which is, keep your mouth shut, right? Keep your mouth shut. So this is the line that probably, where there's much talking, there is no lack of transgressing. One who curbs the tongue shows sense. So, yeah, interestingly, this is a good lesson for people who engage in gossip and wasted talk today. Some of the stuff that people engage in today, what a waste. So, yeah. There's a phrase, by the way, too, that we hear, especially in the Christian Bible, in the Sermon on the Mount, not inhabiting the earth, which is an interesting translation, but again, it's kind of the riff that Jesus goes on in the Sermon on the Mount. We're talking about who inhabits the earth, who's going to get to live here. In Hebrew, again, it's Yishkenu Aretz. They get to be your neighbors. They get to live here. The word shachen in Hebrew, shakan, is the root for the Shekhinah. It's to be present. It's to inhabit. It's to take up space. It's your neighbor is a shachen, is somebody who's there. So if you think about it, this, of course, is why Jesus goes on a riff of who will inhabit the earth. You start to see it in this period, this phrase being used. It's not it's not a phrase that, you see initially. It really is this kind of, initially in the Bible, but by this period, we start to see these kind of phrases, who will inhabit the earth, which seems to imply that there's like going to be a new order. There's going to be a time when certain people are not here on the earth, which is why you can, get to things like the rapture and ideas that, there's going to be a time when certain people will not be here anymore. It's what you get when you say inhabit the earth. Any other questions or points? This is a fairly long chapter. This is 30 verses. 32 verses to be precise. So, well, let's take a look then at chapter 11.
False scales are an abomination to God, who finds an honest weight pleasing. When arrogance appears, disgrace follows, but wisdom is with those who are unassuming. The integrity of the upright guides them. The deviousness of the treacherous leads them to ruin. Wealth is of no avail on the day of wrath, but righteousness saves from death. The righteousness of the blameless smooths their way, but the wicked fall by their wickedness. The righteousness of the upright saves them, but the treacherous are trapped by their malice. At death, the hopes of a wicked person are doomed, and the ambition of evildoers comes to nothing. A righteous person is rescued from trouble, and it comes to the wicked instead. An impious person destroys a neighbor through speech, but through knowledge the righteous are rescued. When the righteous prosper, the city exults. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. A city is built up by the blessing of the upright, but it is torn down by the speech of the wicked. One who speaks contemptuously of neighbors is devoid of sense. A prudent man keeps his peace. A graceful okay. A base fellow gives away secrets, but a trustworthy soul keeps the confidence. For want of strategy, an army falls, but victory comes with much planning. Harm awaits one who stands surety for another. One who spurns pledging shall be secure. A graceful woman obtains honor. Ruthless men obtain wealth. A kindly man benefits himself. A cruel one makes trouble for himself. A wicked person earns illusory wages, but one who sows righteousness has a true reward. Righteousness is a prop of life, but to pursue evil leads to death. Crooked minds are an abomination to God, but those whose way is blameless are pleasing. Assuredly, the evildoer will not escape, but the offspring of the righteous will be safe. Like a gold ring in the snout of a pig is a beautiful woman bereft of sense. What the righteous desire can only be good. What the wicked hope for stirs wrath. Some give generously and end with more. Others stint on doing the right thing and incur loss. A generous person enjoys prosperity. One who satisfies others shall likewise be sated. Whoever withholds grain earns the curses of the people, but blessings are on the head of the one who dispenses it. One who earnestly seeks good pursues what is pleasing. Evil comes to someone who is bent on it. One who trusts in wealth shall fall, but the righteous shall flourish like foliage. He who makes trouble for his household shall inherit the wind. A fool is a slave to the wise-hearted. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. The wise captivate people. If the righteous on earth get their deserts, how much more evildoers and sinners?
So again, this is about a little over 30 verses, and the focus on this, again, there's not one focus, but there's a lot of ideas that kind of are here. Again, very few of them, if any of them, can really be tied directly to Jewish practice or to Judaism. I mean, there's nothing in here necessarily that feels like it has to be for Jewish people. which again is one of the reasons why people say, was this an adapted book? Was this something that we saw from other people and then we decided to lift it? We haven't found that text. We haven't found the Ur text, if you will. That's what the case is. We haven't found it yet. It probably doesn't exist because this probably was written by Jewish authors who may have been inspired by what Gentile, again, Egyptians or Persians were saying, but it didn't necessarily mean that they, again, had to quote page after page of a text for them to write these things. Again, we saw this phrase here, a tree of life, and it's Chaim. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. But again, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to make the argument that there's anything in here that's particularly Jewish. Again, it talks about God. It talks about, some of the things that we would see as, being consistent. I mean, it's not inconsistent with Judaism, but and definitely one of the themes of this text is wealth, right? It's money. There definitely seems to be an interesting concern with money, especially in these last couple of chapters, which, by the way, implies some level of stability in the sense that people who are fighting for their lives are being taken into captivity. People who are fighting for their lives generally don't write about things like this. This seems to be a fairly, number one, seems to be a commercial society, which seems to be engaged in business and transactions that, again, even if they have grain, if they have farms,
They have a
it's not about
surplus.
the
because they can give
farmers.
it away.
Exactly. It's about the surplus. It's about a guy sitting with a silo with food and saying, hey, I'm waiting for the price to go up before I start selling my bread, my grain, right? You're not making bread yet because the price hasn't hit the right price point. And it's basically saying those kind of people they're not good, right? These are people that we might say are price gougers. And it definitely says that this is not the right thing to do. But it definitely has this feeling like this is a society that's stable, that's financially secure, that has at least a class of people that are making money doing in trade, engaged in trade. This does not sound like a tribal society, right? This does not sound like Abraham and his family and his people living
These
in
are
tents.
people who live in cities and think that cities are good.
Yep. These are people living in that kind of society, which is why we date it from a period that, again, was more of a stable period, that period after we returned from the exile with the Persians. Under Persian stability and Persian rule that was stable for the people living in the land of Israel. Again, be hard pressed to actually make the claim that this has to be in the land of Israel because there isn't really there's not really any lines here which seem to indicate that this is inherently requirements for people that are just living in Israel. There's nothing in here about tithing. There's nothing in here about sacrifices, as I said. There really isn't this sense of what we do when we're in the land of Israel and running our business out of there. So this is really not there. And again, when it comes to wealth, there's definitely an understanding that your wealth should be shared with other people. It's not, again, specifically going to the priests. It's going to other people. It's sharing it with others, which you don't have to do, obviously. You don't have to give it to the temple if you're not in the land of Israel. But again, there's no reason to say that this was not written by people living in the land of Israel. These people don't seem to be that engaged in a temple cult, if you will. It's not that they're not. We can't say that they're not, but it's not what they're writing about. It's not what they're talking about. And when they're talking about sharing their money, they're not talking about giving it to the priests, which is what we see in the book of Deuteronomy, for example, or some of the other books of the Bible where it talks about supporting the priests. This isn't here. That's not an indication of your of your devotion, of your faith, of your goodness, of your righteousness. It's taking care of other people. And again, not thinking that our wealth is going to protect us. The previous chapter said wealth is like a fortress for the rich. Yeah, but here it's telling you that don't think that your wealth is going to protect you, right? It says specifically that, again, this is not the answer. Wealth is of no avail in the day of wrath, right? And wealth is not going to protect you on those in that situation. So as much as, financial success is important, what it's telling us is it's not the end all, right? And it's also not going to come anywhere close to doing the right thing. Doing the right thing is what we're supposed to be doing, not worried about how much money we get. And when we get it, we should be sharing it with others. So there definitely is that understanding here in this chapter. And specifically when we get to things like a city, that's a city, right? That means that people are living in city, right? When it talks about your neighbor, it could be your kin, could be kinfolk, could be translated that even, but there definitely seems to be people living in a society. They're living where people are around them. And so, yeah, there definitely is that understanding that this is a society that's built around community. Any other comments or questions? So I have this very famous line here, right?
Inherit the wind.
Yes. Wait, where was that? That's the line, inherit the wind, right? But no, I was looking for the this line right here. Like a gold ring in the snout of a pig is a beautiful woman.
Lipstick on a pig.
Yeah. Lipstick on a pig. That's right. Here it's a little bit more, here it's even more, it's even more expensive. You put a gold ring in the nose of a pig. So, yeah, it's a very visual and powerful image of what really matters in life. And yeah, what we're looking at. So definitely supposed to be sharing with others, right? Give generously and with more. This kind of prosperity gospel. You don't have to worry about giving it away because you're going to get back. Yeah. So definitely is this sense of people living in the city, people dealing with ethical behavior, and yeah, there definitely seems to be people dealing with a society where there's people all around you. You got secrets, you got information, oftentimes because you're living in a society where there's people all around you. So, yeah, it's chapter 11, and let's take a look at chapter 12.
One who loves discipline loves knowledge. Whoever spurns reproof is a brute. A good person earns the favor of God. A man of intrigues, God's condemnation. No one can be established in wickedness, but the root of the righteous will not be shaken loose. A woman of substance is a crown for her husband, but an incompetent one is like rot in his bones. The purposes of the righteous are justice. The schemes of the wicked are deceit. The words of the wicked are a deadly ambush, but the speech of the upright saves them. Overturn the wicked and they are gone, but the house of the righteous will endure. A man is commended according to his intelligence. A twisted mind is held up to contempt. Better to be lightly esteemed and have a servant than to put on airs and have no food. A righteous person knows the needs of their beast, but the compassion of the wicked is cruelty. He who tills his land shall have food in plenty, but one who pursues vanities is devoid of sense. A wicked man covets the catch of evildoers. The root of the righteous yields fruit. Sinful speech is a trap for the evildoer, but a righteous man escapes from trouble. A man gets his fill of good from the fruit of his speech. One is repaid in kind for one's deeds. The way of fools is right in their own eyes, but those who are wise accept advice. Fools' vexation is known at once, but the clever conceal their humiliation. A faithful witness tells the truth, but a false witness deceit. There is blunt talk like sword thrusts, but the speech of the wise is healing. Truthful speech abides forever, a lying tongue for but a moment. Deceit is in the minds of those who plot evil. For those who plan good, there is joy. No harm befalls a righteous person, but the wicked have their fill of misfortune. Lying speech is an abomination to God, but those who act faithfully are pleasing. A clever person conceals knowledge, but the mind of a dullard cries out folly. The hand of the diligent wields authority, the negligent are held in subjection. If there is anxiety in someone's mind, let them quash it and turn it into joy with a good word. A righteous person gives friends direction, but the way of the wicked leads astray. A negligent person never has game to roast. A diligent one has precious wealth. The road of righteousness leads to life. By way of its path, there is no death.
It's an interesting way to finish, right? The road of righteousness leads to life. By way of its path, there is no death. I mean, is it literally, of course, never going to die? Or is it more symbolic? Is it more metaphorical? That righteousness, there really is no death. There's no death for the righteous, in the sense that they're never really gone. The people who are not righteous, we can't wait to get rid of them. So this kind of maybe goes a little bit away from some of the monetary concerns of the previous chapter into more, behavioral things. This is a wonderful line. The ways of the fool is right in their own eyes, but those who are wise accept advice. Yeah, I mean, what's a great indicator of somebody's foolishness is their inability to see anything beyond themselves, right? Their narcissism. They don't think that what they're doing is wrong. They'll never think that what they're doing is wrong. And again, on the contrary, somebody who's really smart knows you got to pay attention to when people are telling you, especially when people who are smarter or wiser than you are telling you you're making a mistake. You listen to them. And those people are wise, the people who actually listen to other people, the ones who are open to criticism and to, thoughtful advice. It's an amazing idea. And it's so true. I mean, it's so obviously true that we see all around us. It's a great thing to think, kind of try to think if we're doing this ourselves, right? Think about whether we are so full of ourselves that we have an inability to think about whether what we're doing is right or not. So that's a interesting, again, idea of external care. Anybody have any lines here that stuck out? As I said, again, this is not necessarily one line connected to the previous line, but anybody have any comments or questions? ideas that stuck out in their head here. Yeah, this one, this Eshet Chayil, is of course all of chapter 31 is Eshet Chayil, praise of a woman of substance, a woman of valor. But this is our first indicator that, yeah, that's a title for something. But yes, this is chapter 12, and chapter 31 is, line after line describing the Eshet Chayil. But here we have it. The next line here, of course, has nothing to do with the previous line, the one of a woman of substance, a woman of valor, a woman of courage, an Eshet Chayil. It's a title. Again, began right here with the idea of Oheb Musar, the one who loves discipline, or correction, if you will, loves knowledge, right? So it's an idea that we've seen before.
There was something about kindness to animals. I thought.
Yes, right here. A righteous person knows the needs of their beast. Yeah, the compassion of the wicked is cruelty. Of course, that's a horrible translation because the compassion of the wicked, they don't have compassion. Yes, and
I thought it was like, being sort of facetious there, because
yeah. Well, the interesting
that's
thing
not
is
the right word, but ironic.
yes. Well, it goes to this very simple fact, right? Of there's a horrible translation for this word because it actually has its origin in something very important and powerful. So the first idea, right? A righteous person knows what their animal needs, which, by the way, can be understood literally. They're animals that they take care of. Their behemoth are their cows and their horses, their mules. They're domesticated animals. But to some extent, it's also, the things that they're responsible for. The opposite, right? The compassion of the wicked is cruelty, is the translation for the word rachameh. How do you translate that? Because the word rachem we translate as mercy, compassion. El malei rachamim, God full of compassion, we say at a funeral. The word rachem,
The
rachaman.
tender mercies of the wicked. That's,
What is the King James translated as, Mary?
Tender mercies.
Yes, right. So rachem, and by the way, it's the same word in Arabic, rachaman. Allahu Rahman. This is God is merciful. In Hebrew, it's a feminine form. The word racham is the origin, the etymology of that word is womb. The womb. Because again, to indicate what's the expression of mercy that we have in Judaism, it's to give birth. It's to be, again, the nurturing uterus, if you will, of not the belly, by the way, that's a different word in Hebrew, that's baten, which a man can have too. A beten is a belly. That's not what a racham is. It's a uterus. It's a womb. And so here's an example of you can't really translate this. Because if you say if you're translating rachem as compassion, racham, as the word rachamim is compassion, that's not clearly what it means here, because there's no good English word for it. So I'm not going to say it's a bad translation because it's very hard to do it. But the closest you could say is, but the womb of the wicked is cruelty. So what's the intention here? What's the real meaning? The birthplace, if you will. Where is the origin? What's the origin of wickedness? The origin of wickedness is cruelty, which is the translation of the word achzari, which is not a very common word for wickedness. We usually use the word rasha, which we have here, right? We have rasha is translated as wickedness, but cruelty, evil, you know, where does wickedness come from? It comes from a place of cruelty, of hate, of evil, you know. It's kind of a stupid phrase because, you know, of course that's where it comes from. Wickedness comes from a bad place. Rashaim, the wickedness comes from a bad place. It's essentially what it's saying. I mean, that's really the translation. The wickedness comes out, is birthed out of a bad place. We could say that too. It's birthed. It's birthed from a bad place. That's probably a better translation because it makes more sense than compassion. Compassion there makes no sense. I don't know if the origin of the word compassion somehow has that idea of not necessarily goodness, but it definitely, I mean, we only use the word in the sense of goodness. It makes no sense in the way it's written out. But if you said wickedness is birthed from cruelty, that would make more sense. That's the intention of this, which again doesn't necessarily go with the previous line, but seems to be about animal cruelty to some extent. I think it is. Seems to be a line about animals, and again, maybe it's more than just animals. Yeah. What else? See if there's any other lines here that stick out for people. Yeah, anyways, I love that line, right? The one of the way of the fools is right in his eyes and in their own eyes. A foolish person doesn't think they're doing wrong, right? They don't think they're doing wrong. They think it's right. They don't think necessarily what they're doing is wrong. So, and that's a good line too, right? It's a one we can really think about. Fool's vexation is known at once, but the clever conceal their humiliation. Which, by the way, I don't know that they're necessarily, you know, encouraging people to have. They're not encouraging people to be humiliated, but if you are humiliated, keep it to yourself. It's definitely a feeling here that's maybe not in your control. Look, it's the exact opposite of the society we live in today, where people air out everything that happens to them, including the things that you're like, why is anybody sharing that? Why in their right mind are they saying this right now? Why would they not keep that to themselves? And again, they know in some cases that it's humiliation, right? The translation is vexation here is you know, the things that are troubling to them, they you know, people share that right away. It's known right away. But yeah, somebody who's got some sense, right? They don't tell people every time something bad happens to them, especially again when they're humiliated. They don't have to share it. Yep, some good advice for our age of social media, where we do silly things and then brag about them. Overshare is more like it. So, some great advice for us today. Chapter 13, actually, we're going to begin with a kind of a style that we had in the previous chapters, which again, don't have as much in this, which is a son being talked to by their father, which definitely seemed to be in the first, you know, five or six chapters, is a son basically being told what to do by a father, by a teacher. Let's take a look at this.
A wise son, it is through the discipline of his father. A scoffer, he never heard reproof. A man enjoys good from the fruit of his speech, but out of the throat of the treacherous comes lawlessness. Those who guard their tongue preserve their life. Those who open wide their lips, it is their ruin. A sluggard craves, but has nothing. The diligent shall feast on rich fare. The righteous hate lies. The wicked are vile and disgraceful. Righteousness protects the one whose way is blameless. Wickedness subverts the sinner. Some pretend to be rich and have nothing. Others profess to be poor and have much wealth. Riches are ransom for a person's life. The poor never heard a reproof. The light of the righteous is radiant. The lamp of the wicked is extinguished. Arrogance yields nothing but strife. Wisdom belongs to those who seek advice. Wealth may dwindle to less than nothing, but one who gathers little by little increases it. Hope deferred sickens the heart, but desire realized is the tree of life. One who disdains a precept will be injured thereby. One who respects a command will be rewarded. The instruction of the wise is a fountain of life, enabling one to avoid deadly snares. Good sense wins favor. The way of treacherous men is unchanging. Those who are clever act knowledgeably, but dullards expose their stupidity. Harm befalls a wicked messenger. A faithful courier brings healing. Poverty and humiliation are for the ones who spurn discipline, but one who takes reproof to heart gets honor. Desire realized is sweet to the soul. To turn away from evil is abhorrent to the stupid. One who keeps company with the wise becomes wise, but one who consorts with dullards comes to grief. Misfortune pursues sinners, but the righteous are well rewarded. A good man has what to bequeath to his grandchildren, for the wealth of sinners is stored up for the righteous. The tillage of the poor yields much food, but substance is swept away for lack of moderation. He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him early. The righteous person eats to satiety, but the belly of the wicked is empty.
Excellent. Well, this one definitely seemed to be a little bit more about a parent talking to his child, or wonderfully here, grandchildren. We don't have a lot of talk in the Bible about grandchildren. We really don't. B'nai banim, children of my children. We don't have that phrase a lot in the Bible, not because people didn't have grandchildren. Obviously, we read about, Jacob blessing his grandchildren, and we definitely have people who have grandchildren in the Bible who live to see their grandchildren, but we don't have a lot of talk about it. Here it's interesting that there's a bequeathing, right? There's this something that they can give to their grandchildren. Yeah, if you're good, you're going to have something for your grandchildren. There definitely seems to be an idea here that wealth is not exactly what you always think it is. Oh, by the way, let's get it out of the way because it's the most famous line in this chapter, and it's one of the most famous lines in all of Proverbs. Sometimes it's the only line that people know from Proverbs, and that's this one right here, right? Line 24. Right?
Right, spare the rod and spoil the child.
Spoil the child. It's a horrible translation.
Horrible.
It's a horrible idea. but it doesn't necessarily, it's just bad. I'm not going to justify this line, though it does say discipline, right? It doesn't have to be physical discipline. The second part of this definitely seems to imply that it's just general discipline. It's what we call, again, musar, instruction. Again, if you hate your child, you don't discipline them, you don't instruct them, you don't teach them. It's a very interesting idea, which is, again, a concept that we definitely think of in Judaism, which is that our job as parents, as people of a previous generation, is to make sure that the people coming after us know what to do, and in some cases, again, have to be disciplined. They have to be told what you're doing is wrong. If we don't, in effect, we hate them. We hate them because we're going to cause them ruin, and they will wind up suffering because of it. And so, again, people focus on the brutality of this, the fact that it seems to be somebody beating their child with a stick. There is definitely in Judaism an idea that it's not something you should have to do, use any form of corporal punishment. But in some cases, obviously it would have been done. Well, look, let's just say one more thing about this. The way that the Bible lays this out, it seems to indicate that not everybody hit their child with a stick. If they did, there wouldn't be this line. But the interesting thing is that what the Bible's saying here is that if you think you're helping your child by not disciplining them, you're not. You're not. You are creating a really bad situation for them if you're not disciplining them. And I think we can all agree that that makes a lot of sense. Children who are not given discipline or any kind of direction and who are not given any boundaries wind up becoming very, very destructive people, almost guaranteed. If you don't teach a child that there are rules and that there are consequences and that there's going to be some sense of accountability, they will do bad things. And it's on the parent that they've done that. Again, it's not saying you have to beat your child. It is saying that for those who think that they're helping their child by not disciplining them, you are not. And that's what I take away from it. I take away from this that we have an obligation as parents, as people of a previous generation, whether they're our children or not, we have a responsibility to make sure that we don't let the next generation go off the rails. And that means that we have to establish consequences for them. So, whether there are students, whether there are, the people who are taking over, they cannot be undisciplined. You're not helping them. Not helping them. And again, there's this understanding that throughout Proverbs that part of our good behavior is discipline and self-control. Now, again, this doesn't seem to be the biggest problem that affects the Jewish community, but it has been, especially in times of success, right? In times when Jews are running from the Nazis, pogroms, or general difficult periods, this isn't the biggest concern that people have. But in times of economic success, in times of comfort, and, when we have the wherewithal to enjoy the pleasures of life, this is an issue. So again, you have to almost have the comfort of stability and success to even be worried about this kind of situation. But it is something that comes out of success. It is something that comes out of stability and comfort. And it is a challenge for the Jewish community today, which has become more economically successful for the most part and more comfortable, that we had to make sure that the next generation of young people understand that they have consequences. And it's a challenge. It becomes a challenge. It's been more of a challenge for the Jewish community in the last 2 or 3 generations as Jews have become more middle class, some cases very successful. And when we see, people in our community behaving without a sense of discipline or without a sense of, consequence or morality, it's a problem. For the most part, we've done, I think, a fairly good job, but it's not easy. It comes with work. And what's interesting about this, of course, is that the theme of this book is how do we balance economic success with personal success and morality and ethics, right? And so this is an important idea. The Bible is not telling people to be poor. There's definitely not that sense. That's why when we get to the Christian Bible and we have the meek will inherit the earth, or the poor will be the ones who are successful. It doesn't say that. The Bible doesn't say that. The Bible doesn't promise that in the Hebrew Bible. But it definitely saying what your value should be, what your priority should be, where you focus, right? Where you focus your attention is not on, is not on economic wealth. But if we don't balance this, right? If we spurn discipline, we'll wind up poor and humiliated. Right? That's the consequence for it. And it's true. How many people have squandered their parents' money, their parents' wealth, because they had no discipline? They went off the rails, right? So there's also this understanding too that wealth can disappear, and you don't always have to go for the quick score. What really happens oftentimes is the person who gathers it a little bit over time does a lot better. And it goes with almost everything, it goes with knowledge. It goes with, people who try to cram a bunch of information in their head oftentimes don't remember any of it. People who, try to lose weight in 1 week usually aren't successful with it. People who try to get a quick score economically usually aren't successful. So there is an understanding that it takes time and it takes consistency. So this is really, really beautiful, a beautiful idea. But again, what's really important, right? This is an interesting line here. Some pretend to be rich and have nothing. Others profess to be poor and have much wealth. Can't always tell who's well. You can't always tell who's got money. You gotta know that, there are people who you never know because they don't wear it. They don't walk around spending money and showing it off, right? They're careful with their money and they protect it, which is definitely an idea that you're supposed to, share it with poor, but not squander it, and have discipline. So this is definitely a theme here that we have. Again, what are the priorities? The priorities are not to be rich, but if you are rich, make sure you don't go off the rails. This is all great. These are all great things to think about. They're all relevant today. Again, they seem to be from a time when people have the economic success and the wealth to be able to do that, to be able to be engaged in these kind of discussions. It's a good thing to be able to have that ability to be successful, and there are consequences to it as well. So it's some beautiful teachings here, right? And ones that, again, when people talk about what's in Proverbs, well, that spare the rod, spoil the child, that's in Proverbs, that's in the Bible, that's in Proverbs. They really miss the point, because again, the context of this is clearly, discipline, self-control, and making sure that the people that we're responsible for, the people that are going to continue, our society, they better have self-control too. Any thoughts, Rosemary, as we read through this? As you read through this?
Covered mostly everything I thought of.
What?
I said, I think it covered most everything that I thought of.
Yeah, this is a line that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find here, though. Desire realized is sweet to the soul. That's a really interesting idea, because even though we're supposed to have self-control, we're not supposed to deprive ourselves of things that we want either. I mean, the
Well,
next
your
line is
desire
kind
for
of,
wisdom.
yeah, but it doesn't actually say that. It
Right,
says
but it could
ta'ava.
be that.
It could be. It could be, but it's telling us that when we have something that we want and we get it, it is sweet to the soul. That's the word.
Don't have to deprive
Karev
yourself
lenefesh.
of uh,
The second part of it's kind of not even connected to it.
right.
It's almost like a separate idea completely. Turn away from evil. You tell someone who's stupid, they're not going to turn away from evil. Okay, that makes sense. But is it really that connected to the previous line, which is really about desire, which again, I guess if we achieve things that we wanted and we're happy with it, that's good. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's sweet to the soul. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Now,
Definitely
you can
seems to
kind of
be.
read it that the evil people's the reason evil people don't turn away from evil is that they get their evil desires realized, and it's sweet.
Well, that's interesting, because that's assuming that their desires are bad in the first place.
Well,
Uh,
but clearly some of our desires are bad because it keeps
Yeah.
warning us about them.
yeah. The interesting thing here is generally speaking, one of the lines is good and one of the lines is bad. But yeah, I mean, it could be. Some of the lines are both bad, but usually there's a good line and a bad line. And it's not always the first line is good and the second line is bad. Sometimes this one is the good line is first and then comes the bad line. This one is the bad line. The bad line is first and the good line is next. So we don't know for sure. If this line is good, but if it isn't, I mean, if they're both bad, it's the only one that in this thing that only.
No,
Yeah,
I didn't think that. I didn't think it was bad. I was just thinking that some desires
No,
realized.
for sure. But what I think is interesting is that if the good desires realize they're a good thing, then that's actually kind of an affirmation that discipline or self-control isn't, ascetics,
Right.
who give up everything and say, hey, I'm a monk. I'm not going to have no desires at all. I'm going to obliterate my desires. I'm not going to have any desires for food, for sex, for wealth, for comforts. I have to give up everything. It doesn't say that. I mean, that's the way I read it. But it only because, again, one could you could be led to this understanding that discipline, self-control means that we don't have any fun. But if so, that's the only reason why I kind of pointed out that maybe this is a good thing, or a positive, that desires can also be positive. Only from the standpoint of, usually when we use the word nefesh, which is translated as soul, it seems to be kind of the holier parts of us, in the sense that it's not the base desires. The nefesh usually isn't understood to be the lower forms of our soul. Even though, again, it's kind of a later idea, but this idea that we have a nefesh, a neshama, and a ruach. The ruach is usually, again, like the lowest form of our soul, the animating spirit, if you will, and the nefesh is the next one up. Still, an animal might have a nefesh, right? So an animal will have a ruach, an animation, if you will. That's what keeps you moving. A nefesh is kind of like a spirit that is maybe like midway through our stuff, and then the neshama is the highest. The neshama is the highest level of our soul, the one that is the divine, if you will. It's the piece of us that's a little God. There's an argument amongst the Kabbalists and the spiritual, those who search the text for deeper truths. An animal may not have a neshama. It'll have a nefesh and a ruach, but it may not have a neshama. I don't want to get into that right now. I don't know, and I don't want to be interpreted as I'm saying that they don't, but there are some feelings that maybe animals don't have a neshama. They have the lower forms of the spirit, but not necessarily a neshama, which is the divine, the piece of us that is the divine. We'll get to that maybe at another point, this idea of what a neshama is. But yes, the words that exist in the Bible, and then later on in the later texts they start to develop them a little bit more. Just so you understand, that's not an inherently Jewish discussion either, because the Egyptians started talking about that 3,000 years ago. So it wasn't like there's a question of whether even the Jews the words exist in Hebrew, but there's a real question whether the Egyptians, whether we borrowed it from the Egyptians. I'm just saying, don't know for sure. And again, it does not exist necessarily independently of the other ideas. I will just show you the Egyptian understanding of it was there was the ka with the ba and the ach. So we see this in Egyptian writings, who again were definitely obsessed with these ideas of the soul and what happens to us after we die. So whether we invented it or borrowed it, don't want to speculate, but we do have these words in the Bible. So a nefesh might be more susceptible to desires, by the way. So I should have even said that, but neshama is really the divine, the highest level of our souls.
But in Hatikva, we say nefesh Yehudi.
Yep, you're absolutely right, Elise. Elise just raised a good point. Nefesh Yehudi, the soul of the Jew. Though we could argue that that's kind of the midway point. That's not our ruach. That's not just spirit, but nefesh. Nefesh is used a lot for describing our souls as, so is neshama. Mm-hmm. We say good and neshama all the time, right? That's the good soul that a person had. But the understanding to some extent is that the neshama is the part that's definitely part of God. Not that nefesh is not a part of God or that's not holy, but the nefesh is more of an animating spirit. And so in Hatikva, even it makes sense from the standpoint of either we don't use the word ruach a lot anyways. We use that for spirit, for energy, but it's more like just energy. The energy that gets us up off the ground. Like he stood up and he moved. He has ruach. It's like Frankenstein. He's got animated energy. Keeps him going. The nefesh is a little bit more thoughtful in the sense that the nefesh of a Jew is to be free, right? There's another level to it. And the neshama, I don't want to get into it too much, but at the neshama level, I'm not saying that we would ever get into this. I never thought I would say this, but at the neshama level, nationality and ideology and religion almost wouldn't matter anymore. Right, because it's you're on such a holy level when you're living on a neshama level that you don't even think about it anymore. Not that nishmat Yehudi, we wouldn't say nefesh, the nishma Yehudi, but nefesh Yehudi makes a lot more sense than neshama Yehudi, because the neshama of the Jew is the highest level of us is. Yeah, the spirit that God gave me, absolutely what as Rosemary just said, our morning blessing, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahorahi. The soul that you gave me is pure, right? That's like the pure divine energy that again, if the lowest level is the ruach, which is like animating energy, it's almost like blood force in our bodies. Or the animated energy, the electrical stimulus that goes to our bodies. The highest level is the neshama, which is the God's energy, the divine energy. And the nefesh is kind of in the middle. It's kind of divine, but also, I don't want to say animalistic, but also kind of just a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more where the mind and and the the body come together. But neshama is almost, again, that's why it's almost independent of the body. That's why when we say Elohai Shenatata Bi, right, the energy that you gave me is pure. And that's the pure energy. And that's the energy, by the way, we're supposed to harness. That's the energy we're supposed to focus on in our lives to try to elevate it, to try to make it as much a part of what is driving us as possible. At a level of, again, ruach and nefesh, if we're being energized by that, we're energized by kind of commonality of like what an animal would be energized by, taking care of our needs, taking care of, thinking just of again sustaining ourselves. Nothing wrong with that, nothing bad about that, but not on the neshama level, which is again when we're living on the plane of the neshama, that we're literally just trying to be as pure as possible, trying to be as elevated as possible. So it's hard to live on just on neshama, but we understand that that's what God's given us to live in this world and to cultivate and to protect for whatever reason. I mean, we're not really sure, by the way, like why did God give us a neshama? Why did God give us this? Neshama might be the main essential question of life, right? Maybe that's why we're here, right? Is to cultivate this neshama in this world. That God's given it to us. And again, the idea is that that's the part that goes back to God when we're done. The interesting question of, again, which is again something that Kabbalah deals with, and to some extent any kind of metaphysical discussion about the spirit or the soul kind of gets to, how much of that neshama is, how much of it do we attach to our own ego to? So how much of it do we have to say, I have ownership over the neshama, and the neshama is mine in the next world too? In the sense that, is that what we think about when we're saying our spirit, we want our spirit to go back to God? Is it the spirit that we cultivated in this world and therefore left our mark on? And is that not just a reflection of our ego trying to say, I want that neshama to be my neshama that goes into the next world? Or is the sparks that we are carrying with us, that divine spark, is it going back unless we take it down to such a low level that there's nothing left of it? If we deplete that energy and then there's nothing left, and the energy that God gave us never got back to the divine source. These are again some of the discussions that happen in Kabbalistic discussions about the soul or spirit, but it is an interesting idea, and maybe one that will, who knows, maybe at one point science and faith will come together on this, and we'll have proof that there is a spirit that's divine energy, and then we'll say, well, yeah, that's the part of us that is divine, and it's connected to us while we're in this world. And we're supposed to nurture it. But yes, as Rosemary pointed out, we're supposed to begin every day with a recognition that neshama is in our body right now, and we're grateful for it. And it's pure. And it's a part of us that's pure. It's a part of us that at least we have the ability to keep pure. I don't know if it's always pure, but it started out pure. When you gave it to me, God, it was pure. Can we keep it pure? Can we keep it from that? And again, maybe the problem is when we focus on the primal and the earthly things that we deal with, we take it down, we dirty it up, get it dirty. Our job is not to get the neshama dirty while it's with us. Why? I'm not sure. Not exactly sure. There's differences of opinion on that, but there's something to think about, folks. Something to think about, that as long as that neshama is within us, we're going to be thankful and we're going to do our best. And that's a good idea to think about today, every day. I think we have time for one more chapter. I think this chapter, let me just see, chapter 14, I think is kind of about the same length. As you can see the structure with it. Yeah, we probably should leave. It's actually a little longer. We'll probably leave it off there. We won't read 14 necessarily today. But again, we're about halfway through Proverbs, as you can see. In the next week, maybe 2 weeks, we'll be reading through these chapters that are like this. And then we get to the end chapters, which I shouldn't even tell you, but the last chapters are a little different, and they're almost like appendices. And some people have said, can't you recognize that those were tacked on later? And again, as I said in the Septuagint, it's very obvious that they're tacked on, but they really are appendices to some extent, where people said, what about these lines? Don't you think we could put this chapter in with Proverbs? And that's what it seems like it was. But yeah, we're about halfway through Proverbs now, and we're going to we will be here next week. In the meantime, between now and then, we get to celebrate Hanukkah, and so again, for where we all can come together on this and bring it back home, we hope that the lights of Hanukkah, and I'm not the first to say this, that the light is supposed to elevate our neshama. It's supposed to elevate our souls, and the light has that potential to do that we increase the light every day, because we believe that we have the power to increase the light and to we have the power to increase that light and to make it bigger as we light the candles, and what they symbolize for us, that the candles are a reflection of hopefully our lives moving in a positive direction, and taking that to the next level. So we hope that happens, and we hope that Hanukkah is time for us to be increasing the light for ourselves and for those around us, and for the world, which definitely needs our light. I'll just show it to you, since we're kind of in Proverbs, and we were never going to get to this line today. Maybe we'll get it to it next week, but I think we might fall up a little short. We're not in a rush to get to it, but here's the line. This is Proverbs chapter 20. Wait, where did I go? No, I went into Psalms. I missed the book. No, we just did Psalms. Now I will just get real quick to get to Sepharia. Hold it a second. Let me just get you the line. Show you the line that we're discussing. Here it is, right here. My favorite line in Psalms. I guess as I got older. It's not a weird translation, but kind of gets the essence of it. Ner Adonai nishmat adam. A mortal's life breath. That's the way they translated it. Nishma, I would say. A mortal's life breath is God's lamp. Ner Adonai. That's the first part of it. The Ner Adonai is the candle, or the light, the lamp of God, is Nishmat Adam. How does the King James translate that?
The spirit of man is the candle of the Lord.
Yeah, I like that translation a lot better. I mean, but a candle, again, in the old days, they didn't have a candle. It wasn't a wax candle necessarily the way we see it, but it was a lamp. It was a oil lamp. It's exactly what we talk about at Hanukkah, a ner, a candle, a light, one light. And the light of God the lamp of God is the Nishma Adam, is the neshama of a human being. So again, the innermost parts is part of it as well. But what is that first part? The first part is that we're carrying around a spark of God. And Ner Adonai, we have a lamp of God inside of us. What we do with it is obviously up to us. That's the interesting question. Why,